My name is Abhishek Rai and I work for BMC Cloud Lifecycle Management product. Today I'm going to talk about CLM data store cluster and compute pool configuration. As you know that from BMC CLM 4.0 onwards, one can add data store cluster by just onboarding the compute cluster associated with the data store clusters, or you can create compute pool associated to data store cluster separately. The plan is to discuss data store cluster and compute pool configuration. Once you're done with this configuration, you will have a data store cluster onboarded into BMC CLM solution, and a virtual disk repository pool will be created using this virtual disk repository resource type. During the demo, we'll discuss and configure data store cluster. So let's switch to the vCenter and BMC Cloud Lifecycle Management Administrator console and take a look at these configuration. Okay, I'm on one of my vCenter, and so before we onboard data store cluster, we need to have a data store cluster at the vCenter side. And just in case you do not have one, you need to click on inventory and switch to data store and data store cluster. Just select your data center and right click on new data store cluster. To create a data store cluster, we'll go with all the default options shown on the wizard. The only key is that you need to select data store or LUNs which are shared across all the hosts onboarded into your CLM. So as I have already created one, let me click close over here. So here is my data store cluster and it has got two data stores. So you can see that. So you can click on data store tab and take a look at the data stores. And let's click on hosting clusters. So this data store cluster associated with one of my cluster which is already onboarded into CLM, and it has got one host over here. Once you are done with the configuration at the vCenter, let's switch to BMC CLM administration console. Okay, I'm on a BMC Cloud Lifecycle Management Administration console and have logged in using my Cloud Admin user. I'm on a resource management workspace and under resources, quick link under the compute section. Let's select virtual disk repository as a resource type. As I mentioned earlier that in case you have got compute cluster already onboarded, then with that onboarding, you will have your data store cluster onboarded as well. But in case you have created your data store cluster at the latest stage, then you need to select your cluster and then click on sync button over here, and that will populate and will onboard your data store cluster. So here is my data store cluster, and the type is a little different. So for data store clusters, the type will be cluster colon VMFS or NFS. So VMFS is stand for virtual machine file system. So once you have your data store cluster visible over here, you can switch to compute pool section and create a virtual disk repository pool using this data store cluster resource type. So let me show you the existing configuration quickly. So here is my already created data store cluster. Let me quickly edit and show you the configuration. So name could be anything, description could be anything. I have given a tag so that service governor uses the policy to place my services or place my resources on this data store cluster. Okay, so pod, and then resource type was selected as virtual disk repository, vendor was VMware, and then provider type was BBSA. Once I selected all of these options, I have got an option to select data store cluster. So I have already selected it. That's the reason it is at the right hand side. So now you can see that the type was cluster colon VMFS, and then virtual cluster with which this data store cluster is associated is CLM 2.1, and then the total space on this. Once you select your data store cluster from the available resources, click on Save button. Now with this configuration, you have got your data store cluster onboarded into CLM, and you have also created a compute pool using this data store cluster. In the next video, we'll be using this data store cluster configuration into the service blueprint, and we'll go ahead and submit a request. I hope this video was informative for you, and I would like to thank you for watching this.